Thank you, Denise, for the intro, and I'm excited to be here. It's a great speech by Adiba. That was really inspiring. I'm really grateful to be here today talking about the future of work because it seems very relevant and spot on in this odd 2020 year that we're living in, where our work is already evolving, perhaps into that future. I'd like to ask each of the amazing women on this panel to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we'll talk about this topic. We want to start with Linda.
Sure. Linda Pouliot, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dishcraft Robotics. So we're in Silicon Valley, and we're automating dishwashing.
Right. Aruna?
Hi, Aruna Ravichandran. I'm the CMO, VP of Marketing for the Webex collaboration business at Cisco. Very, very excited to join this panel today to talk about future of work, which is a topic which we hold very near and dear to my heart.
All right. Priya?
Hi, everyone. My name is Priya Saiprasad. I'm a partner at Mayfield. We are a 51-year-old venture capital firm based in the Bay Area, and we've invested over time in enterprise, consumer, as well as some engineering and biology. We typically operate in early stage, so Series A and Series B is sort of our sweet spot.
Thank you. And Jomayra?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jomayra. I'm at Cowboy Ventures. We are a seed stage focused fund here in the Bay Area, generally investing in seed stage opportunities. So early early days in terms of companies. I focus on everything related to future of work within the firm. And the way I describe it is I focus on the human element of future of work. So anything that relates to helping workers thrive in their careers and their work settings.
Thank you all so much. And I'll start by just saying, I think we all know that the future of work has changed because we're doing this conference on Zoom today, and that's not what we would have done a year ago. So we're all living it. And I want to start with Aruna, because I know that you've been talking about the hybrid workplace. And I'd love to know how you see that working out now and how you see that in the future of work.
I would say that, this concept of hybrid workplace, we had heard about hybrid cloud, we had heard about multiple different things when you think about hybrid, but now this new concept called hybrid workplace is here to stay. Because of the pandemic, everyone across the board, even including a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, knows how to use collaboration technologies like video conferencing technology, because that's been the way of all of our lives over the last 6 months. So when I actually talk about a hybrid workplace, I'm actually talking about the mixed environment. So everybody is now shifted into remote work, and we're all collaborating using technology like we're doing today. But as you think about the potential future, what is the future going to be when you think about the hybrid workplace? I do believe that this remote work concept has taught a lot of companies as well as individuals that there are a lot of pros and cons you actually can get with remote work. The pros are you don't have to basically, do that long commute into your office during the day, and you can save a lot of time. Another pro is, you can promote a greener earth, right? So sustainability becomes an important element across the board. Another pro is you can get talent anywhere in the world because people have the ability in order to basically work from home. Having said that, complete remote work also has some of the negativity associated with it. There is a rise in terms of mental health. People feel extremely lonely. The technology cannot completely replace the, face-to-face in-person interaction. So given all this, I definitely think that there is going to be a hybrid workplace where people are going to go back into the office, not potentially full-time, couple of days in terms of the, they'll probably, depending upon the companies, they'll probably go into workplace, 2 days, 3 days, doesn't matter. It's every company is actually going to adopt a methodology in terms of being able to bring people back into the office. And as they think about that, more and more companies are also thinking about how can they reimagine their existing real estate. Are we going to basically go into those long conference rooms? Potentially not. You'll have to reimagine workplace so that it's much more open. So companies can also think about safety of employees as they bring people back into the office. So that's what I actually call a future of hybrid workplace. And I think it's there to stay for a good amount of time. The COVID has actually shown us, there are a lot of pros and cons, and that is going to be the future of work, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Aruna, for sharing that. And it just resonates so much right now with where we are having to kind of work differently. You brought up sustainability, and let me ask Linda, as a fellow woman in the world of automation and robotics, can you share with me a little bit of your thoughts on sustainability and how that plays a future in today's hybrid workplace and in the future of work?
Sure. So I believe that all leaders, regardless of gender, should make sustainability a company-wide key initiative. At Dishcraft, we're particularly sensitive to the environmental crisis. So our core business is really focused on helping the world switch from single-use disposables to reusable foodware. As an example, there's 360 billion food packaging items thrown away in the US each year, and that's just not sustainable. And so our team is really continually developing ways to help protect the planet, beginning with our customers and beginning with how the company acts ourselves. And it's part of our DNA, and it starts with me and my team.
Can I just ask, I noticed you mentioned that it's everybody's role to do sustainability. And I read an article in The Guardian earlier in the year that was talking about sustainability being sometimes seen as women's work. And I was wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit on that.
Oh, me or?
Yeah, sorry, Linda.
Oh, sure.
Because you had mentioned it regardless of gender. I was like, well, maybe we should dive in and talk about that, because there's articles saying that somehow ecology work, sustainability work is being associated as being women's work. And you'd mentioned,
Sure.
Regardless of gender. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, actually, we're seeing more and more men heading up sustainability efforts on the corporate level. And I think it's everyone's crisis. And so both genders are starting to take it very seriously. I think leaders in facilities and real estate and workplace are often headed by men, and they're now understanding and committed to reducing waste and conserving precious resources. So it may have started basically as a financial issue, but now it's a sustainability challenge that the entire world is trying to solve.
Thank you. Jomayra, I read some of your blog posts, which were awesome, and I highly recommend them. And you had talked a little bit about the empowered economy and specifically the need for flexibility, which I think we've talked about a little bit so far this morning, and also something called the career stack. Can you share some of your thoughts on this and how this can help empower women and shape the future of work?
Yeah, totally. So in the article, that I read a little bit about in the history of the U.S., and I focus on the U.S. because it's the labor market I understand a lot better than some globally. It's historically been a tension between wanting independence and autonomy. I mean, we started as an agrarian economy, and then also wanting some sense of stability and safety. And we've had a hard time actually reconciling both of them. And the pendulum over the past couple of years has swung heavily to the independence and autonomy side with the rise of the gig economy. And so in this like vision that I talk about with the empowered economy, it's really related to this idea of like, how do you reconcile both, where you're able to have some level of independence, autonomy, flexibility, which we know is super important, particularly for women, but also for people that are caregivers, for people that, and not just caregivers of children, but caregivers of elders that have a level of familial obligations, which sadly often disproportionately fall on women, have that flexibility and autonomy, but also have the level of stability where you don't need to feel like you have to do a gig economy job and pick up shifts here and there, but rather you can have a job that respects and aligns well to what your needs are in terms of the obligations that you have at home. And again, this goes for men and women. And so we're starting to see some companies that are adopting those practices. They're fairly like early adopters, but we're starting to see companies definitely go into that route. And partially that's driven by something that was mentioned earlier in the conversation. Now that you can get really talent anywhere, it's fairly distributed. You're able to like, now you're able to be able to like you're now able to have more flexibility in terms of like time zones, and like you're able to have more flexibility in terms of asynchronous communication, etc. And so I'm cautiously optimistic, I should say, that we're going into a direction that is able to reconcile those two things, especially for folks that have been most disproportionately underserved by traditional kind of workplace settings.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I do want to kind of come back to COVID and women in the workplace in a minute. But Priya, I wanted to also ask you, coming as a woman in venture capital, is there a unique perspective that you're seeing in women founded and run companies in relation to this COVID workplace as well as the future of work?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Jen. I'd like to start by saying that at the beginning of the pandemic, when things outbroke in sort of March and everyone went into lockdown mode, there was so much trepidation about what that means for the future of entrepreneurship. Does it mean that it becomes incredibly harder to raise capital? Does it mean that it becomes incredibly harder to sustain your startup business, right? And what we've actually seen as VCs is it's actually quite the opposite. We're sort of at this precipice and catalyst right now where there's a fundamentally different technology change that's happening. It's almost at the scale of what happened in the early 2000s, where we're not even at the moment in a hybrid world. And I completely agree with the future work being a hybrid modality. But right now it's pretty much online until at least we get to the other side of this. And so what that means is, there's so many different applications that cater to the business user to make them more productive on the software side. And then there's so many different infrastructure enabling technologies to enable such distributed applications to be built. So in fact, the entire tech stack is fundamentally being reimagined right now. And there's so much opportunity for women to play across the entire tech stack. And there's always these notions and biases that, women CEOs and women founders can't really be as technical. They tend to be more consumer focused than enterprise focused. And the reality is that's actually First, I don't believe that's true. There's a lot of data points that negate that point. But if that were true and women were much more consumer focused, now in this predominantly distributed world that we're living in, how do you bring that sort of human and personal element into employee engagement, into employee retention, and into bringing in entirely new different thoughts and different sort of diversity of perspective onto the table? And there's so much opportunity for development there. And how do you consumerize the enterprise application experience for the end users? I think women founders are fundamentally capable of doing that and sort of enabling that technology going forward. So I actually think that I remain incredibly bullish about the opportunities that lie ahead.
Love it. And actually, that's a great transition. And I wanted to open this up to everyone. One of the things I've been reading about, I'm sure I'm not the only one, is the tide of women who are leaving the workplace during COVID, and how that's in some ways really causing us to slip back in some of the numbers that we've achieved over the last few years. And so I wanted to have everyone weigh in really on what can we do so that we don't lose women in the workplace. We know that there's lots of studies that show that diversity in the workplace, matters, that companies can be more profitable. There's lots of positive reasons why we want women in the workplace, but unfortunately right now it's slipping back. So would love to ask you all to share your thoughts. And this is my first Zoom panel, so I can't point down the aisle to say who would like to go first. So I'll look for you all to jump in.
I'm happy to take a first stab at this one. We've actually seen some of our even portfolio companies do some innovative work on this area in order to avoid kind of women leaving the workplace. I think one of them goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is flexibility, giving them the ability to figure out the schedule that's going to work for them, especially if they have children at home. The other piece is we've seen some companies actually offer some level of benefits or credits that help with things related to how can I provide enrichment opportunities to keep my kids focused and engaged while I am doing my work, or tutoring services, because as we know, distance learning is just hard, especially for a lot of younger children. And so how do I provide tutoring services for families and subsidize it to a certain extent so that their kids can be engaged, because that becomes a huge portion of their time. And then there's also this level that's actually more emotional than related to specific tactics, which one of our companies, I think says it best, which is they have focused in this past year on extending grace to everyone, just assuming best intent, just extending this level of grace, because this year is hard for a lot of people, especially for any form of caregiver. And so they've tried to weave that into their interactions, their communications, and their practices with one another. So those are a few things that we've seen at least our portfolio companies do.
Love that flexibility to the tutoring. That's fantastic. Other thoughts?
I can add to that. So one of the key elements, I would totally agree that, flexibility is really, really important. But adding on to the flexibility piece is about empathy. I think a lot of the managers need to realize, a lot of folks, men, women, whoever is actually taking care of their kids, this is a very, very tough time. So being able to help their employees to basically find that particular balance and being much more empathetical towards the situation they are in, I think is really, really critical. And I think hopefully most of the companies, their HR is really focusing on this particular element, because the flexibility in terms of when you work is critical, but also having that empathy that, you could have, your 2-year-old in the background, while you're actually continuing to work is a reality. And I think that reality is here to stay. And adding on to that, I think technology is also, changing dramatically in order to basically provide an inclusive future for all, right? So in terms of an example, with technology, let's say you're cooking in the kitchen, you have your 2-year-old in the background with you, and you have to join a video conferencing call. With the technology, you can basically turn on noise removal. So that way, only what you actually speak, will be heard by the rest of the folks who are in that particular conference call. And the background noise, whether it's your child crying, or hopefully it is not your child crying, hopefully whatever background noise you actually have will not actually be heard. So I would say having that flexibility, having empathy for your employees, and also leveraging technology, which gives you the opportunity in order to embrace that inclusive future, is going to be really critical.
Oh, that totally makes sense. And I love the noise removal. Is it just me who gets the leaf blower radars you get on the most important call of the day, or just me? So I love the idea of them not having, to be able to have that kind of division in life where you can have your child there and not have to have that heard by everyone, and can kind of keep moving. And empathy, I just want to echo that. That's such an important part of leadership in general. And then I think now even more so. Other thoughts on keeping women in the workplace during COVID?
Janet, I'd like to make a point. It isn't necessarily on keeping women in the workplace, but it's an interesting observation that I've had where it's building off of the empathy point, where it's almost encouraging vulnerability in folks, because now I'm actually chatting with CEOs on a regular basis and founders, and 50% of the time it's men, 50% of the time it's women. And I would say both have kids in the background running around. And that to me is actually like such a striking moment where I don't think we would have seen that in the past. I think sometimes we just have women sort of taking care of these standard roles. And, now it's actually fantastic that men are getting to experience the same degree of chaos that, we as women have experienced at different times. And so I think from that sense, from a more optimistic sense, it's sort of evening the playing field. Like the kids are home, mom is working, dad is working, and they both sort of have to take care of it from some sense. So, and so from a company side, I think it's really important to encourage that kind of vulnerability. Like don't be there. There's a sense of professionalism, which is definitely essential, but there's a sense of, embracing the fact that we're all sort of going through this together. And if there's kids running around in the background, that's completely fine. It just humanizes you a little bit more. And so that's sort of my take here.
I think that's fantastic. And it's a good point. Just reflecting on what you said, I'm thinking about the people who maybe I had no idea had children, but you find out in that. And vulnerability, the key lesson in my career was that vulnerability can be strength. And so I love that you brought that up. I think it's something that we sometimes forget. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other thoughts? All right. I'll ask a slightly different one. So I don't know about you all, but I'm stuck in this 2D world where I see you all on my screen and I see the walls of my house, but I don't, get to have kind of the team dynamics and the team collaboration that I used to have. And one of the things we could do when the weather was better is we would do like 3 or 4 person social distance, so walks, wearing the mask and everything, but we actually got to see a person in 3D, which turned out to be such a luxury in this year. What are you doing, or what are you seeing people have success with in terms of team dynamics and collaboration? And how do you think that's going to influence the future of work? Because I think Aruna and several of you said, this isn't necessarily going to change drastically. Like this is kind of the path we're on at the moment. So I think this will affect us going forward. So I'd love your thoughts on creative ideas of how we can keep those team dynamics just on the screen mostly.
So I can take that, especially in terms of what I have actually implemented with my teams. I have a global team across all regions. So for me, this is actually not been a tough transition because most of the folks are around the globe. So I would say one of the key things we have actually institutionalized is because, in order to make sure that we have the team dynamics going is bi-weekly, I have a trivia game, which, people can join depending upon the geography and using Webex. We have a moderator, we pick multiple different topics across the board, and then everybody comes together and the moderator actually moderates the trivia game. It's become such a viral part of our concept in terms of our teams. So that, one of the trivia games is actually figuring out key things which other team members actually like. And so this COVID situation has actually brought the team together in much more of a stronger way, because anything you actually institutionalized, if you do it consistently, then you basically get people to embrace that. And it gives you an opportunity. I totally agree that you cannot take away the face-to-face interaction, but you can do small things in order to bring the team together, bind them together. Trivia games is one. The other thing I would definitely say is constant communication. I think communication is so important, especially given this this particular time. And I actually believe it's okay to over communicate, because things, when you have that face-to-face interaction, it's totally cool. So having the face-to-face, having this over communication with your employees, I think is critical. And last thing is, I wrote a blog about how do you basically bring back the physical water cooler. How can you actually do a virtual water cooler, right? So because we used to basically go into a cafeteria, or into, basically go for walks with our employees. So how can you actually do that one-on-one? And so again, doing things like that consistently using technology like video conferencing technology, I think is going to be very critical as we move forward.
Yeah, I will add to that. I've actually been really positively surprised by how this has been actually an opportunity to get closer to teammates in some ways, because what this has forced us to do is actually be super intentional about how we think about team building activities. Whereas before COVID, or before shelter in place, it was effectively, we saw each other in the hallways, and we would bump into each other in meetings. And so like, it was a lot more reliant on serendipity, which is wonderful and it's great. But one, it tends to be non-inclusive, because there are some people that don't have, like, either they're introverts or don't bump into you in the hallways. And two, it's like not really intentional. And so now, like, it's a great opportunity to say, you might do like a trivia game. For us, we like, our team loves this like doodle game that we do that some people are really, really terrible at. But it's funny, and we set aside time to do this like once in a while. I agree on like the over communication, just staying in constant communication. We actually instituted daily stand-ups now, where we meet every day as a team for 15 minutes in the beginning of the day, like something that we didn't even do before. And to be honest, I think it has made us more in sync than we were before shelter in place. So in some ways, it's been a great opportunity to be super intentional and inclusive about how we think about building team and building rapport. That said, like, I obviously do miss seeing my team in the office face to face. But I think there have been some creative ways to overcome that.
We've done similar. So we've done scavenger hunts. Because we're foodies, we did this one game, like what's in my fridge, a guessing game, and everyone loved it. For happy hours, we do virtual cooking classes where every team member, makes their favorite dish and teaches everyone else. We also, for 2 hours every day, just have everyone do their work, but they're on Zoom. And so if they can just pop up and ask a question, very much like if they're in the office in person. And so that's actually helped too.
I love that, the being on Zoom and kind of having that working time together. I'll share, we also did the murder mystery one, and that was quite fun too. So we've been trying different things to try to replace that. As a kind of a small follow-up, I'm curious, one of the things that I've seen a challenge with is folks who are starting at new companies, not just at mine, but others as well, who've never met anybody they work with. They've never been to the office, even seen pictures of the office. I forgot what the office looks like. So, I mean, and they've never even seen it. So, we're doing different things to try to help people feel included. I have friends who've started new jobs, And it's a hard thing to get to know the culture. And I suspect if this is kind of part of that future of work where you, or even like Aruna was talking about, when you have global teams, sometimes you don't ever get a chance to meet the person in person. How do you think the future of work is going to change that? Because if we don't get to see each other, how are we going to have those connections? Is it just these team buildings, or are there other things we can do?
This is a great question, Jen, because I've spent some time thinking about this. My sister is actually a decade younger than me, so 10 years younger, and she just graduated from college. And it's her first job post-college, but it's entirely remote onboarding. And so she's been sort of going through this and asking for advice. And the number one thing, looking back at what I benefited when I was sort of breaking into the workplace and new in a place, was trying to find mentors and people that you can truly learn from and forge those relationships who can sort of have alpha impact on your career. And so how do you actually form those mentorship relationships? They're somewhat organic. And I think this goes back completely to Jomayra's point, which is we need to be intentional about this and incredibly more proactive than you ever would have in that sort of in the old 9-to-5 kind of workplace model. It's important to identify who are folks that you want as your mentors eventually, outreach to them. And on the receiving end of it, people who get these requests should be much more open to accepting it, right? And so I think that's the only way, by being incredibly prescriptive and proactive about it, that's the only way you can sort of create those relationships that end up truly impacting your career.
I can add on to that. Totally agree with you, Priya. So my oldest daughter just joined as a data scientist at Twilio, especially I think in September. And I can tell you that she really struggles with the onboarding, because she was an intern last year during her third year at Twilio, and it was very easy to basically pat somebody on their shoulders to basically say, hey, can you give me help? I have this particular defect I need to fix, or a support call, etc., etc. But right now, she tells me getting small things like having a Datadog environment took her 2 weeks in order to basically get that done, because everybody's working from home, everybody's got various different challenges. So I actually, and she's a Gen Z, and in their mind, it's really hard for them to basically, become a part of the workforce. So this is an area which I've been thinking about myself. How do you basically enable the future generation? It's about everyone, because we all could change jobs. It's about being able to be a part of a different company. But especially when you think about the care-abouts and the wants and the likes of the Gen Z as well as the Gen Y, they operate a little bit differently. And I would say, like, one of the key things which Priya said is definitely true. Every company needs to find a way to build out those mentorships as well as sponsorships when they onboard, especially younger, newer employees, because they pretty much get lost. The other thing is leveraging technology. My second daughter is actually doing an internship at a technology company, and one of the key things they did was being able to create spaces like the chat spaces using Webex with our Webex teams, where there is that same kind of thing which Priya said. It's not like one-on-one mentorship, but there is an ecosystem set of people who have the ability to basically provide guidance when they actually need it, because I think the face-to-face interaction is really important for the younger generation, especially as they start coming into the workforce. So mentorship opportunity, providing a support infrastructure using technology. And then last but not the least, I think HR systems need to find a way in order to basically innovate when you think about future of work, especially when you think about onboarding employees. This needs to be a program which needs to be at the top, and where HR leaders need to work with IT to figure out clear-cut ways, leveraging technology on how do you actually onboard younger generation into the workforce.
I think those are all fantastic points. And in terms of reaching out, I think for some of us, it's also like, I think sometimes people are afraid to reach out. And I don't know about you, but my thought is like, reach out. I'll help you. And if I'm not the one, I'll help you find someone. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? I will share one of the ideas I heard was that the manager would do a list of 25 people to meet with in the first month, and really make that around people they needed to help them do their job or people they thought they would have good dynamics with. So I think that's another option, but it's certainly not something that's super scalable long term. So Aruna, I think that kind of IT system and HR, how we do that definitely seems like the future of work that we'll need. I want to pivot for a second. There is a question in the chat. So interesting comment by Priya about women taking their enterprise experience into the consumer space. What about women taking their ability to multiplex to new heights in the enterprise? And thank you, Linda, for that question. So any thoughts?
Yes. So is it, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question fully. Is it women building companies in the enterprise? Is that sort of?
I'm not sure. Their ability to I assume it's women building in the enterprise. So I'm going to assume that that's the case.
Got it. Got it. So I actually have strong thoughts on this because there's always this common notion that there are less women entrepreneurs in the enterprise than there are consumer women founders, right? And we've launched a couple of women founder competitions to sort of dispel that myth over time, both at my former fund as well as my current fund. And turns out we got thousands of applications from women founders in the enterprise. So they're out there. It's sort of up to us as VCs to really proactively broaden our networks and source from entirely new geographies, entirely new demographics. And so the one part about this environment and eventually the hybrid environment that we will move forward into is it makes accessing new geographies and accessing new demographics to be pretty democratized in a sense. When everything is via Zoom, the inherent biases that you get in person, Zoom actually kind of takes that away in a sense. And then you're able to have entirely remote diligence process where you're meeting with an entrepreneur that you normally wouldn't have from some part of the world. And so I think the trend there is actually more positive, in encouraging more women to enter the enterprise sector, especially take the risk of building their own companies. And in terms of creating large enterprise companies, I think now more than ever, as I mentioned before, I think the entire tech stack has room for improvement and disruption. I think it was Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, who said that at the beginning of the pandemic, Microsoft had gone through 2 years worth of digital transformation in just 2 months. And so you've got a lot of these old school industries that normally were fine with pen and paper and sort of, this is how we've done it, this is how we're going to do it. And now by brute reawakening, they all had to completely digitize entirely overnight in a lot of cases. And so what that means is there's actually so much more opportunity in the enterprise realm, both the application layer as well as the infrastructure layer. So I think more than ever, the opportunity is ripe for women founders to build enterprise companies.
Thank you. And to that end, we're talking about misconceptions there, I think, a little bit. So I would ask each of you, what is the most common misconception you hear about women, and specifically thinking about it in this future of work? Women in the future of work, what's the most common misconception? For me, the one I'm hearing a lot is that they're obviously that they're caregivers, they don't have time. I'm hearing things like that. I'm not sure if there's something that you all are hearing as well.
I mean, we're constantly hearing that the reason fewer women are leading companies is because they're choosing to prioritize family over work, but it's just a myth. I think that in reality, the barrier to advancing in careers is really an inflexible workplace. So.
Yeah, and I agree. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the one, I don't know if I would say it's a misconception as it's actually more of like a false premise, which is this idea that I hear a lot where women aren't like taking leadership positions or aren't ambitious enough because like they're more soft-spoken. They don't take on like the leadership type of role. They don't take on this like ambitious mentality. They don't want to. When in reality, like when you do try to be ambitious and you do try to take on that like male persona or whatever it is, it oftentimes backlashes against you. And if you're a woman of color, it backlashes against you 2 times over. And so like when I think about, some of the misconceptions or whatever it might be, is that we live in this society where there's like one particular perspective of what a leader looks like. And if you try to, as a woman, try to fit into that mold, sometimes it doesn't work for you. And then I also like, secondly, disagree with that we have to fit into that mold. And so I think it does a huge disservice to women. And I don't know if I would call that a misconception as much as it's just almost like a false premise.
I think that's spot on, and I couldn't agree more that I don't think we should have to fit into the mold either. And I think the women you see on the panel today obviously aren't fitting into the mold and they're still successful. So clearly it's definitely a false premise. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I also should mention, please, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'd love to answer them. And I've got a new one. I've heard that many of the women who have left the workforce have done so because their male partner earns more. Any thoughts on that? I mean, I've heard of it, but I've also heard of it plenty of times the other way. So I know plenty of women who make more than their husbands and they're the breadwinners. So, you know, I definitely think it happens, but anyone else have thoughts on that?
I also think like, I guess it just totally depends, but from what I have seen, at least anecdotally, is that most households actually need the two incomes. And so in order, like, it's just rising costs, whether it's childcare or whether it's like tuition because your kid is going to college or whatever it might be. Like, I've seen more and more households, especially millennial households, need both incomes. And it's very hard for one person to not be in the job. So I don't know, maybe it's a generational thing, but that's anecdotally what I've seen.
Excuse me. I think that's spot on. And living here in the Valley, that seems to be the norm. That for many people, 2 jobs is needed. So maybe my view is a little bit from here, and so I haven't seen it quite that way. But those are some really good points. I wanted to bring up, please, if you have questions, please ask in the Q&A. A friend of mine was in the convention industry, and they can't do conventions anymore, obviously, for all the reasons that we know. And so one of the things that he was talking about is this idea that it'll change in the future and be maybe 20 or 50 VIPs in a very safe environment and everybody streams the convention. Are there other things like that that you're hearing or thinking of in relation to how we'll work in the future? Are there kind of those kinds of things that you're starting to hear rumblings of? And especially when I think about, you know, Linda with the automation and the robotics, I could see where that could, not so much convention, but where there's like kind of changes of paradigm. Are any of you hearing similar things?
And we like, look, we're in robotics, and so we definitely, and we're in the food service industry, and so we've seen like where banquet operations have completely gone away, but we are seeing that they're starting to come back. They just come back in a different way. And so, you know, I think that across industries, things will adapt that way. So in the food service industry, instead of you going up and, you know, just plating the food yourself, someone plates it for you and hands you, you know, something, and usually covered. And so I'm just starting to see across, you know, construction and all these other fields, everyone is adapting to a new way to have that still in person or touch between people, you know, whether it's trying to adapt it through Zoom or, you know, outside gatherings or whatever. So
Makes sense. Thank you. And then any other, again, I'll ask for any other questions. I hate to say that I ran out of scripted questions, but I will work on it. I guess while I have all these wonderfully smart ladies on the call, are there other things that you would like to share with our crowd today? Otherwise, I'm going to make stuff up. All right, my apologies. I didn't realize we would get through everything so quick. I want to come back to empathy that was being talked about. One of the things I think is important in leadership in general is empathy, and it's something that's supported me throughout my career. And I can remember in the beginning of my career, it wasn't always seen as a positive. Can you give some examples of how you leverage empathy in your leadership and your leadership style today?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this one, where I think empathy is something that's like a secret skill that you can truly leverage to your advantage. And so a capitalist view on empathy. But I think when I'm sort of negotiating with an entrepreneur, and you know, nowadays capital is pretty much a commodity. There's so many different VC firms, so many different partners, so many different folks that you can go with. And so when I'm trying to understand the mindset of an entrepreneur and what they're thinking as they're going through the decision-making process, I think empathizing with them and understanding exactly where they're coming from, what matters to them the most, and being able to cater your style and offering to them, I think is something that has helped me a lot. And then within the firm, there's always your the entire business is identifying an opportunity and then convincing your partnership that this is a opportunity worth investing in. And usually a lot of times you get a lot of dissenting views, right? Some of the best deals are the most contentious deals. And so understanding where someone's coming from when they're giving you some sort of a negative feedback is actually really helpful, because maybe they've been burned on one deal that they did in the past because of XYZ, and they're bringing in that sort of insight. And if you're able to sort of see where they're coming from, then you can actually mitigate for that. Maybe they are making a fantastic point, or maybe there are ways to showcase that that's actually different in this particular case. So I think empathy is something that is like the one thing I would say I cannot live without to do my job.
I totally agree. I apologize for the dogs in the background. And empathy. I totally agree with Priya. I think empathy is totally a superpower, especially in this role. Sorry, these dogs are going crazy. I have no idea why. Oh, is there someone else's dog going on? But I actually can give a specific example where recently I was meeting with, so one thing that I've noticed, particularly with female or underrepresented minority entrepreneurs and founders, is that they tend to be a little bit more guarded and a little bit more not closed off, but like they just tend to be a little bit more guarded in terms of like showing who they are and their personality and the strengths that they bring to the table. And also just like how wonderful like what they've built already is. And so I had a meeting with an entrepreneur where she just felt like really guarded, and I felt like I didn't really get her personality. So I sent her a note afterwards and I was like, I want to do another meeting, but like I also want to share that I've noticed this from female and underrepresented minority founders. And like, I don't know if that's the case with you, but like, I'd love to get to know you better and your personality better, because if we decide to work together, it's like a 10-year relationship plus. And she wrote back and she was like, you're the first person that's ever said something like this to me, ever. And you're totally right. Like I have a tendency to be super professional and buttoned up. And then the next conversation, she shared a lot more about her life and like was just so much more herself and more natural. And her like actual superpowers really came through. So that's, I guess, just one anecdote. And I'm going to go on mute so you stop hearing the dogs.
That was some fantastic points. Thank you so much for sharing both of those. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is definitely a superpower. And I think when people feel heard, when people feel like you understand where they're coming from, you automatically have that better connection, and work automatically, I think, is easier. And I also think it puts us in the mindset of kind of assume best intentions, so that people know that, and it has such a powerful effect. I know we're starting to run short on time, and there is one other question I think is really good here. Would there be one thing to focus on as we move forward? How can we start applying these lessons that we talked about in relation to the future of work? And so I'll open that up to everyone. While we're thinking, I will say that kind of the one thing I'm trying to do is to find a way to make sure that I'm connecting with folks in different ways. If that's for walk and talk, and we both go for a walk, but we're on our cell phones, who knows where in the world, but just trying to make sure that I'm making connections in this new world, because I don't want to lose those team dynamics. So that's kind of the one thing I'm applying every day. There's some connection that I'm making to kind of strengthen the teams. Other thoughts?
I think oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think the one thing that we keep coming back to is flexibility, and that we've said over and over again. If there's one thing that we can focus on, is like, how can you make the workplace flexible and work for a wide range of people?
So this might be a little bit controversial, but I would say that one thing which is important, whether it is the COVID world or the post-COVID world, doesn't matter. I would say, teams need a purpose to basically fight for, right? So having that vision in terms of how can you basically enable the teams, whether you're working remotely or you're working face to face, really doesn't matter. So how do you basically come up with something which everybody basically believes in that particular cause and have a purpose, which is really important, worth fighting for? I think is going to be really important across the board because it brings everything together in terms of being able to move the work forward. And we as leaders have that absolute ability in terms of being able to instill that with our team so that we can, leverage the existing technology as well as all of the various different things we talked about, like empathy, flexibility, empowerment, engagement, in order to move work forward in the future of work.
That was awesome. Thank you, Aruna. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just add embracing your true North Star. I think that's so important in this environment where it's so easy to get carried away with your day-to-day tasks, and as they accumulate, you don't have the people environment, you don't have that sort of people dynamic going, you're stuck on Zoom calls all day. But knowing the greater purpose of what you're doing and keeping that consistently at the forefront of your mind makes it so much more meaningful and bearable.